Well, the federal Liberals have presented the throne speech and are set to make some changes in 2020 with a minority government. Joining me now is Michelle Rempel Garner. She is the federal Conservative MP in the Calgary Nose Hill riding. Good to have you with us, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Michelle, you were not overly impressed with this Liberal plan here. In fact, you called it an insult to your constituents. And Finance Minister Bill Morneau also giving us the fiscal update this week. So some more red ink coming our way as well. What do you think?
Well, for those watching, the throne speech, practically what it means is it's the government, Justin Trudeau's government, laying out its vision for the country for the foreseeable future. And I think what really frustrated me was, given the sense of anger and frustration that Albertans are rightly feeling right now with regard to our economy and some of the legislation that had come forward from Ottawa, to not have a mention in the throne speech in any sort of material way, it was infuriating, frankly. And that's what I heard from, many people across Alberta who've written into my office since then. So I think it's right to scrutinize. And then to your point as well, today we find out that the government under Trudeau has incurred a significant unexpected deficit. And there's also rumors today that they are going to be increasing the carbon tax. So,
Wow.
This type of this type of deficit spending without our community seeing anything that's making their life better, and an increase in tax, no mention for Alberta in the vision for our country. This is only going to make things worse here, and we're going to have to really fight against it.
Okay. Yeah, in Alberta, we were not big fans of the of this news for sure. So now the Liberals have said they're open to tweaking how Bill C-69, Bill C-48 are implemented. Now, do you believe that? And again, do these bills need tweaking, or do they need something more along the lines of a complete overhaul?
I guess I'm just tired of Alberta sort of being on the, back end of, tweaks, or like this is somehow a big concession or something great for Alberta. I've watched, for example, the Bloc Québécois leader, Mr. Blanchet, stand up in the House in the last week and just get the rapt attention of the federal Liberals, because they know that they have to negotiate with Quebec for a path to majority for them. Why doesn't Alberta get that same level of attention? And the reality is that C-69, C-48, it's not about tweaking. They're two bills that fundamentally destabilize the investment climate in Alberta. And I don't understand why we're being subject to that, or that's, somehow talking about tweaking, is that a good thing or not? They should just not be there. And I think, frankly, we've come to a time in our country where political leaders from Alberta have to start marking lines in the sand on what's acceptable for our province and what isn't. And that's where I'm at on this. They both need to go. They should not be here. They're destructive to our confederation, and that's my opinion on this.
Okay. Well, now the Liberals have given a green light to Alberta's industrial carbon tax for heavy emitters, but that, again, January 1st, Albertans, everyday people, are going to be again paying a federal carbon tax on fuel for our cars, natural gas to heat our homes. A lot of economists saying in order to meet the government's 2030 targets, the carbon tax would have to quadruple. So, where do you see this going?
Well, again, today we're hearing news out of Ottawa from Environment Minister Wilkinson that they are indeed looking at hiking the carbon tax. This is, before the carbon tax has even been completely implemented in Canada. And, I find it coincidental that hike in a consumption tax, the carbon tax essentially functions like a GST or a PST. That's happening on the same day when we find out that they've got massive unprojected, unbudgeted expenditures coming out of Ottawa. Look, we have to care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we know that a carbon tax is not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. It's a cash grab. And you're right to say that this is about everyday Albertans and Canadians and their, how much we're paying. And I think that this is bad public policy that the Liberals shouldn't be allowed to run roughshod with.
Well, we'll see where it goes, yeah. Now, the government is promising to strengthen the middle class, and we're just talking about the middle class here, I guess, right? Finance Minister Bill Morneau announcing a tax cut to save the average Canadian family. I think it's around $585 a year. So I mean, I guess the numbers would be similar to what the Conservatives were promising. So are they headed in the right direction on this particular area?
Well, first of all, they can't even define what the middle class is,
Mm,
right? And
hmm.
for me, the reality is there's a lot of people in my province, my community, in our country that are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're living in situations with precarious unemployment. So for me, the question, the tax cut that they're talking about is cold comfort when we hear that they're going to be increasing the carbon tax and that they're really not going to be doing anything to restore the economy in many parts of the country. And I think that's where a lot of Canadians are concerned. When you start talking about precarious employment, loss of jobs permanently, the energy sector especially, I think that's where there's a loss of trust in the government just on fiscal management writ large. So I guess bottom line, you can't increase tax on everything through the carbon tax and then expect Canadians to get excited about a small shift somewhere else, especially when we're seeing a loss of economic opportunity.
Sure. How about affordable housing? That's an issue, of course, in certain cities. Yeah.
I think the question is around affordable housing is different in different regions of the country, right? If somebody is watching this in Vancouver, the reasons for a lack of affordable housing are far different than they would be in, let's say, Toronto or other parts of the country. So we need to have a national strategy that addresses problems that are different in each part of the country. But also, I mean, this goes back to what we were just talking about. People can't afford to pay rent or to buy a house if there's no prospect for long-term employment for them in the country. And I think we're kind of at the point where many people are saying, well, look, if I don't work for the government, I don't really see job stability in Canada. And that is a very bad sign for our economy writ large. Certainly, the government has a role to play in providing and ensuring access to affordable housing, but that ties into so many other policy areas: the economy, immigration policy, government spending writ large. And we just haven't seen a lot of sustainable action from the federal government. And I do think my party, the Conservative Party, has a role to play in that conversation, and we will be doing that as we go forward.
And there's been talk about, too, maybe having some provinces like Alberta, do we need to have the same mortgage stress test as they do in Vancouver? You know.
Absolutely. And some of my colleagues who have been arguing about this for, saying no to that principle for a long time on the Conservative benches, we did hear that the government is considering looking at the stress test and making some of those changes, but we have to pressure them in a minority parliament situation to do that. You're spot on. And that's a very important policy that has affected home ownership for many Canadians.
Right. Here's another one that Albertans, I have friends who are gun owners. Here's a Liberal plan to fight crime. Now, this includes, banning military-style assault rifles and buying them back from the legal owners at a cost of, I think, around $600 million. And considering the research says most guns used in crimes are smuggled in from the U.S., is this money well spent?
Well, first of all, I think we all can agree and have to agree that preventing firearms violence is a very important thing in Canada. I certainly believe that. And that's where you have to start looking at what is the best public policy instrument to do that. What's the best way to do that? In Canada, the data shows that firearms that are used in violent crime, a vast majority, I believe it's over 95%, are actually smuggled in from the United States. They're illegally obtained. So the money that they would use to buy back property sort of on an ad hoc basis, when we have such a very strict licensing regime in Canada that's so much more strict than the United States. I am a firearms owner myself. It's an exercise in politics as opposed to an exercise in humanity. If we want to address violent crime, firearms used in violent crime, then that money, think about what $500 million could do to augment the RCMP's presence, let's say, or have better detection and penalties for those firearms that are being illegally imported from the US. I think that this is a debate that has been purposely put in place by the Liberal government to wedge and inflame and sort of make firearms owners the bad guy, as opposed to putting a spotlight on their lack of ability to address this issue. through the policy that we actually need to make a difference. And certainly that's something that I strongly oppose. And I think that many Canadians, when they understand at the heart of this is a care for our community and a desire to reduce firearms violence to zero, I think people will come on board. And some of the terminology that's being used, firearms that they're talking about banning right now that have come out this week, they're hunting rifles. They're tools that are used by hunters, by, farmers. This is ridiculous. And you can certainly expect to hear more from me and our party on this.
Yeah, for sure. How do we define what an assault rifle is? There's a 5-round limit in any magazine you put into a gun in Canada, at least for rifles. And of course, normally we think of this long, AK-47, 50 shots in the rounds, or, in one of these magazines. That's not the case here. That's not legal in Canada at this point already. So I'm not sure how much, good this will do.
I was just going to say very quickly, the other point being that, you in Canada, you can't just go and buy a firearm. There's an extensive vetting process. It's not like the United States. Anybody who owns a handgun or, these types of rifles is heavily vetted, you can only take it to certain places. So it's not the same. And it's something that we have to get this debate back to pragmatic policy and care for our community.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of emotion that comes into these gun debates, and we stray from the facts fairly quickly, it seems. Now, there's going to be a lot of pressure from the NDP on the government to implement a national PHARMACARE plan. So, do you think that's doable? And would it be cost effective? Right?
Well, I think we have to understand who's being served and by this plan and what the gaps are in policy right now. I think that's step number one. When people talk about PHARMACARE, we have to understand who isn't being served right now in this country, and I know that there's some debate on that. Obviously, affordable access to medicine is something we all want to achieve, but when people are talking about this, like certainly the NDP, the Liberals, they haven't put any detail around that. And I could look at this camera and I could say, yep, we're going to do something without a plan. That's not responsible, especially when we've seen the government be $7 billion over budget in 1 year. I think that we have to, first of all, the pragmatic approach is to say who is being underserviced in Canada by our current programs that exist to have access to medication to people. How do we best service them, and how do we pay for it? And I think that will be our party's approach going forward, not ignoring the fact that we want to make sure people are healthy, but also making sure that we're targeting the right people, those that are most in need, and that we have a plan to pay for it.
Yeah, it's important. Nothing comes for free, right? So, hey, before we close here, I do want to touch base, of course, on the in-house divisiveness that seems to be there in the Federal Conservative Party at this point. Andrew Scheer just resigning. He wants to spend some more time with his family. So, there's some infighting here, of course, saying, well, this has to do with, paying the difference between what it costs to send Scheer's children to a private school in Ottawa compared to the cost in Regina. Was it okayed by, the Conservative Fund, or wasn't it? Dustin Van Voot gets fired. Wow, it's a bit of a, airing of dirty laundry that doesn't, look good on the Conservative Party.
Having this conversation, the people I think about first and foremost are the people who just very recently elected me with a 70% mandate to go to Ottawa. It's people in my community. And what they want to see is stability and holding the Trudeau government to account at a time of, I think global instability, and at a time when we've got some serious problems at home. This week, in the middle of all of this, we were discussing the NAFTA renegotiated agreement, very serious policy. So to those people, I want to say this. That is our first concern as a party, and we are bringing stability and holding Trudeau to account, even in the midst of all of that. The second thing I want to say is I think it is very healthy and long overdue that my party has a conversation about who we are as a party, how we best serve Canadians, and put together a bold vision. The path that we are going down right now as a country, I do not think is the best path for everybody who lives here under this government, the current government. But it is also our responsibility as the Conservative Party to tell people what they are voting for and how we would change. And I think it's healthy to have a leadership race after an election. I think it's healthy to talk about ideas, how we govern funds. And now I find myself as a position. I've been around the party for a while, and I intend to use that level of seniority to force those discussions. And I encourage anyone who's watching this who either has a membership in the party or has voted conservative in the past to be an active participant in this. People get the political parties in Canada that they ask for, and I hope anyone who would consider voting conservative raises their voice and makes their voices heard on this. In the meantime, myself and my colleagues will continue to hold this government to account and do stuff that's in the best interest of our community.
Okay, and before I let you go, there's been some rumblings that you may throw your hat into the ring here for the leadership race. Have you made a decision on that yet?
Look, this is
It's pretty early, I
48
know.
hours. Like, it's early. And to be honest with you, where my heart is at right now is getting the conversation right, the parameters for the leadership race, and also ensuring that the Canadian public understands that we're working for them in Ottawa in the middle of all of this. So sure, that's a lot of weight to place on my shoulders and others in my party. But I'm more concerned about right now making sure that we get the parameters for that discussion right and that Canadians feel like they can participate in it. So stay tuned. I'm sure that there'll be many people making many announcements, but anybody who's making this decision has to understand why they're doing that. And I think it's irresponsible to do that in a 48-hour period. So
Okay, thanks so much for your time today, Michelle.
thanks, guys.